The Duke who couldn't touch his twins, until the maid saved them one night and changed everything. The first time I held the twins in my arms, they were no bigger than bundles of linen, fragile as glass, and yet burning with the fire of life. Their cries echoed in the stone chamber where their mother had just breathed her last. The Duchess's eyes had closed forever as her children opened theirs for the first time. And from that moment, I swore to God that I would protect them, for they had entered the world already accused of a crime they had not committed. The Duke did not weep that night. He stood at the foot of the bed, his face carved from the same cold marble as the statues that lined the halls of Ravenshade Castle. He looked once at his wife's body, then at the infants in my arms, and without a word he turned away. That silence was worse than any outburst of grief, for it left me wondering if he would ever look upon his children again. Now, 4 years later, the castle still carries the weight of that silence. I have raised Adrian and Alara as if they were my own, watched them stumble through their first steps on the black and white marble floors, listened to their questions whispered in the nursery at night, questions that cut deeper than any blade. Why doesn't Papa play with us? Does he not like us? I never know how to answer. I tell them their father is busy, that dukes carry heavy burdens, but even at 4 years old, they are too clever not to sense the truth, or at least the shadow of it. The truth is that the Duke does love them. I have seen it in the way his eyes linger when he passes the nursery door, in the way his hand trembles when he signs papers declaring them heirs of his blood. But he has built a fortress around his heart, a wall so high even his own children cannot climb it. He fears them, though he would never admit it aloud. He fears the memory of the woman he lost, the blood that stained the sheets the night they were born. To him, their laughter carries the echo of her final scream. The court, however, whispers another tale. They say the Duke despises his children, that he cannot bear the sight of them because they are the reason his beloved is gone. Some go further, calling them cursed, omens of death. I hear these words in the servants' quarters, in the market stalls of the town, even in the corridors of the great hall. I shield the twins from such venom, but children hear more than we think. I have seen the shadow flicker across Alara's bright green eyes when someone turns away too quickly, or when Adrian asks why the knights bow to his father but never to him. It breaks me, for they are not only intelligent, they are kind. Adrian has a mind sharp as steel, already able to read the ledgers I sometimes bring to the nursery. Alara, with her mother's grace, comforts the stable boy when his pony died, whispering that angels must need horses too. They are treasures, these children, and yet they live under a roof heavy with unspoken blame. I cannot allow this to continue. If the Duke does not take their hand soon, the world will believe the lie that he hates them. And when nobles believe a lie long enough, it becomes truth, written into history and sung in ballads. His enemies will use it to weaken him, and his children will grow with hearts poisoned against their own father. So I have made it my mission. I will not simply clothe and feed them. I will bridge the distance between father and children. I have watched grief consume great men before, and I know what it does. It rots love from the inside until nothing but duty remains. But I also know the cure. Love is not something that fades. It is something that must be reminded, reignited. And if the Duke cannot take the first step, then I will place the children in his path until he has no choice but to see them for what they are. Not curses, not reminders of death, but the living proof that love still lingers in this castle. The opportunity must come soon. Whispers are growing louder. Just yesterday, a visiting baron's wife told me in hushed tones that she pitied the children, for they will never know a father's affection. She said it with a smile, but the venom beneath it was sharp. If such rumors spread, they will brand the twins before they are old enough to defend themselves. I will not let them be condemned by silence. Tonight, as I tuck them into bed, Adrian clutches my hand and asks, "Nanny, do you think Papa dreams of us?" My throat tightens. and I force a smile. Yes, my darling. He dreams of you every night. He nods, content with my lie. But when the room grows quiet, I vow to myself that one day it will no longer be a lie. The Duke walks through the corridors of Ravenshade as if they were battlefields. His steps are measured, his cloak flowing behind him like a shadow that clings no matter how brightly the torches burn. To those who see him in council, he is unyielding, a man of strategy and numbers, feared by his rivals and respected by his men. But I have seen the other side of him, the one he hides from the world. I have seen him pause at the nursery door in the dead of night, his hand hovering just above the wood as though reaching for a memory he cannot touch. And then, with a breath too heavy to belong to a man so strong, he pulls away and leaves. It is not indifference. It is fear. I know it now. He does not hate his children. He fears what he feels when he looks at them. For in Adrian's sharp jawline and Alara's bright smile, he sees the ghost of his wife, the woman who died in blood and agony to give them life. Every look, every sound, every word from them is a reminder of the love he lost. And so he stays away, not because he wishes to, but because he cannot bear the storm within him. Yet the world will never understand this. Nobles are blind to the subtleties of grief. They whisper that the Duke resents the twins, that he blames them for their mother's death. Some even dare suggest he will disinherit them if another heir is born. These rumors spread like fire in dry fields, and the Duke does nothing to extinguish them. Silence, he believes, is strength. But in this matter, his silence is poison. The twins feel it. I see it every day. They long for him not as a duke, but as a father. They watch him across the hall when he speaks to his advisors, their small hands clinging to each other for courage. They never approach, as if they fear he will turn them away, and he never calls to them. This unspoken distance is a wound that festers, and I fear it will grow into resentment if something does not change. I remember the night I found him alone in the chapel. He thought himself unseen, kneeling before the altar, his head bowed not in prayer, but in despair. His voice was raw, broken. "Forgive me," he whispered into the shadows, "for I cannot look at them without seeing you." The words pierced me. He has carried this burden alone, punishing himself for a death he could not prevent. The Duchess's heart failed her in childbirth. No physician could have changed that. But guilt is a stubborn demon. It does not listen to reason. That night I realized the truth. The Duke has not only walled himself away from his children, but from the memory of his wife. He has turned grief into armor, and in doing so, he has left the twins in a desert of affection. If I do not act, they will grow believing the lie that their father despises them, when in truth, he loves them more than he dares admit. And so I weave small plans. I arrange for Adrian's books to be forgotten on the Duke's desk, so he might notice the boy's clever notes scribbled in the margins. I encourage Alara to sing near the great hall, where her sweet voice carries to his chambers. Sometimes I see the flicker of something in his eyes when their voices reach him, something soft, something longing, but still he does not move. One evening, as he passed me in the corridor, I dared to speak. "They miss you, my lord." His gaze was like ice, sharp enough to cut. "Do not meddle in matters you cannot understand," he said, and his voice was cold. But as he turned, I saw his hand tighten on the edge of his cloak. His anger was not at me. It was at himself. The greatest danger is not his silence. It is the court. There are those who wait like vultures, eager to exploit any weakness. A cousin of the Duke, Lord Hadrian, has already begun whispering that he should be named regent until the children come of age, claiming that the Duke's distance proves him unfit to raise them. I know his game. If the twins are declared unworthy, Hadrian's line becomes heir. And if the Duke continues to show the world a father who does not embrace his children, then Hadrian may succeed. The twins cannot fight this battle. They are too young to understand the daggers hidden behind smiles. It falls to me. And though I am but a servant, I will fight for them. I will force the Duke to see what he risks losing, even if I must drag him into the nursery myself. He may not realize it yet, but time is running out. One day soon, either by chance or by my design, he will face them not as his heirs, not as shadows of a lost love, but as his children. And when that moment comes, I pray he chooses to hold them instead of turning away. For if he does not, then not even I will be able to shield them from the cruelty of the world that waits beyond these castle walls. Children have a way of sensing truths that adults try to bury. No matter how carefully I guard my words, Adrian and Alara have begun to notice the weight of their father's absence. They ask less now, but their silences are louder than questions. They linger by windows overlooking the training yard where the Duke drills his men, watching as he commands with precision and strength, their small faces pressed to the glass like exiles longing for a homeland they have never known. Adrian, sharp-eyed and restless, once turned to me and whispered, "If Papa can command knights, why can't he command his heart?" I had no answer. Ilara, softer in spirit but no less perceptive, has begun to hide her drawings under her pillow. Drawings of a family, a father holding 2 children by the hand. She never shows them to anyone, but I see them when I change the linens. The ache in her longing nearly undoes me. It was on a cold autumn morning that the first spark of confrontation flared. The Duke had just returned from council, his cloak dusted with frost, when Adrian darted into the hall. The boy carried a wooden sword, carved crudely by the stablemaster. "Papa?" he said, voice trembling but determined. "Teach me." The hall fell silent. Even the servants froze. The Duke looked down at his son, and for a moment his expression faltered. Then he said, "I have no time for games." The word struck harder than any blade. Adrian's little shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched with a pride too heavy for a boy of 4. He turned away without another word, but I saw the sheen of tears he refused to shed. That night, he did not eat. Alara sat by his side, whispering comfort, though her own eyes glistened with unshed sorrow. I could not stand it any longer. Later, when I found the Duke in his study, surrounded by maps and letters, I dared once again to speak. "You wound them more with your silence than you ever could with a sword." He lifted his eyes to me, and for once there was no anger, only weariness. "If I draw too close, I will break," he confessed. "Better they believe me cold than see how weak I truly am." Weak. That is what he calls love. But love is not weakness. It is the only strength that endures. The days passed, and the rift deepened. Whispers at court grew sharper. Lord Hadrian's allies began suggesting openly that the Duke's distance proved him unfit to secure his line. "Children unloved are children unwanted," one lady remarked within my hearing, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. I knew then that something must happen soon, something to shatter this stalemate of silence. It came in the most dangerous of ways. Ilara, curious and adventurous, slipped away from the nursery one afternoon. I found her standing at the edge of the frozen lake that bordered the castle gardens, her reflection shimmering beneath the thin ice. She reached out her hand, as if to touch the world beneath the surface, unaware of how fragile the crust was. My heart seized. Before I could call out, the Duke himself appeared at the path's end. He had been walking alone, lost in thought, and fate had led him here. "Ilara!" His voice thundered across the gardens, sharp with a fear I had never heard from him before. The little girl startled, her foot slipping on the brittle ice. A crack shot across the surface. In that instant, the Duke moved. He was no longer the marble figure of grief, but a man of flesh and blood. sprinting with a speed that startled even me. He seized her just as the ice gave way beneath her small boot, lifting her into his arms with a ferocity that was half terror, half desperate relief. For the first time, the twins saw their father not as a distant shadow, but as a man who could bleed, fear, and love. He held Alara too tightly, his breath ragged against her hair. "Never again," he whispered. Though whether he spoke to her, to God, or to the ghost of his wife, I could not tell. Adrian arrived then, racing from the nursery where he had been searching for his sister. He stopped short, eyes wide as he beheld his father cradling Alara. For a moment, time froze. The Duke looked at his son, then held out his free hand. "Come here," he said. The words were rough, almost foreign on his tongue. Adrian hesitated, pride and longing battling within him. Then slowly he stepped forward, placing his small hand into his father's. The Duke's fingers closed around it, strong and trembling all at once. In that fragile circle, father, son, and daughter, the walls began to crack. I watched from the garden path, my own heart unsteady. It was not yet the reconciliation the children deserved, nor the peace the Duke needed, but it was the first true step. A single moment, born of danger, that revealed what silence had hidden all these years. The love he had buried was still alive, fierce and unyielding, but I knew it would not be enough to silence the court. One moment could heal a wound, but it would take more than that to defend the twins against whispers of curses and blame. The Duke had shown his heart. Now he would need to show his strength, not as a lord, but as a father. The night after the lake, the castle felt different. The air, once heavy with silence, carried the faintest hum of change. Alara clung to her father's cloak as he carried her back through the frost, her head resting against his shoulder. Adrian walked beside them, his small hand still enclosed in the Duke's grip. I followed, my steps unsteady, scarcely believing what I was seeing. For years the man had kept his distance, yet in one heartbeat of danger, the wall around him had cracked. But though a door had opened in private, the world outside those stone walls still believed the lie. And in court, perception was power. The following week, the castle filled with nobles for the feast of winter solstice. It was a time meant for celebration, yet beneath the music and laughter, there lingered whispers sharper than blades. I heard them as I moved through the hall, carrying trays of spiced wine and bread. The Duke has not named a guardian for his heirs. Children born of death can only bring misfortune. Better Hadrian takes stewardship before the line is lost entirely. Every word struck like poison arrows, and though the Duke seemed not to hear, I knew he did. His jaw was clenched, his gaze fixed like stone, but I could read the storm beneath. For the first time, he had allowed himself to hold his children, and now the world sought to twist that love into weakness. That night, Adrian and Alara sat with me in the nursery, too young to join the feast, but old enough to sense something was amiss. Adrian fiddled with his wooden sword, his brow furrowed. "Nanny, why do they look at us that way? As if we are wrong?" Alara pressed close to him, her voice small. "Do they think we are bad because Mama died?" My heart broke. These children bore questions no 4-year-old should carry. "No, my loves," I whispered fiercely. "You are not bad. You are blessings. Never forget that." Yet even as I spoke, I knew words alone would not shield them. Only one man could do that. Their father. The chance came sooner than I expected. During the final day of the festival, Lord Hadrian raised his voice in the great hall, his words loud enough to silence the crowd. "My Lord Duke," he said, bowing with mock respect. "The realm watches, and it wonders. Will you continue to neglect the heirs who cost you your duchess? Or will you act as duty demands and pass their care into wiser hands?" Gasps filled the chamber. Eyes turned, not only to the Duke, but to the children, who stood at the edge of the hall, clutching each other as though facing a storm. I moved instinctively to shield them, but the Duke's voice cut through the silence. Enough. It was not shouted, but it carried like thunder. The Duke rose, tall and unyielding, his cloak sweeping behind him as he strode into the center of the hall. His gaze fixed on Hadrian, but when he spoke, it was to all. You speak of neglect as if you know my heart. You dare call my children a curse when they are the only light that remains of the woman I loved. His voice did not waver, though I saw the pain in his eyes. Yes, I grieved her. Yes, I faltered. But I will not falter again. These children are my blood, my heirs, and the future of Ravenshade. Any man who dares question their worth will answer to me. The hall fell silent, the weight of his words pressing against every stone. Then, to my astonishment, he turned to where Adrian and Alara stood frozen. He extended his hand. For a heartbeat, the twins hesitated. Then Adrian, bold as ever, stepped forward, drawing Alara with him. They walked into the hall, their small hands trembling in mine until the Duke took them. He lifted Alara into his arms, his other hand resting firmly on Adrian's shoulder. The hall erupted. Some gasped, others murmured, but none could deny the sight. The cold, distant Duke holding his children before all the nobility, not as burdens, not as symbols, but as his own flesh and blood. Remember this night, the Duke said, his voice carrying across the chamber. For as long as I live, no tongue shall call them cursed. They are my legacy, and I will protect them with my life. It was a declaration more binding than any written decree. Lord Hadrian paled, his scheme crumbling in the face of such resolve. The other nobles bowed their heads, whether out of respect or fear I could not tell. But it mattered little. The truth had been spoken, and it had been witnessed. That night, in the quiet after the feast, I tucked the twins into bed. Adrian's chest swelled with pride, though he tried to hide it, while Alara clutched a lock of her father's cloak he had given her before leaving the nursery. "Did you see Nanny?" she whispered. "Papa held us. He said we are his light." "Yes," I said softly, brushing her hair from her face. "And now the world has seen it too." For the first time in years, the shadows in Ravenshade Castle seemed to lift. The Duke had taken his stand, not only as ruler, but as father. Yet I knew this was only the beginning. Love once buried does not bloom overnight. It must be nurtured, tended, protected. But the first seeds had been sown, and I would guard them fiercely until they grew strong enough to weather any storm. The days after the feast were unlike any I had known in Ravenshade Castle. Where once the Duke passed his children like shadows, now he began to linger. At first it was subtle, his hand resting on Adrian's shoulder longer than necessary, his gaze softening when Alara laughed. But slowly, something deeper began to take root. One morning, Adrian entered the training yard, wooden sword in hand, his chin lifted with determination. The Duke stood among his knights, giving orders. For a moment, it seemed nothing would change. But then, to the astonishment of all, he beckoned the boy forward. "Come," he said simply. The men watched as the Duke took the boy's hand, correcting his grip on the wooden hilt. His voice was stern, yet not cold. "Strength is nothing without balance," he told him. Adrian listened, eyes shining with a pride no tutor could have given. I saw in that moment the boy's heart begin to heal. With Alara, it was different. She carried her mother's gentleness, her smile soft as spring rain. The Duke seemed hesitant at first, as if he feared breaking her with a touch. But she, bold in her innocence, bridged the gap herself. One evening she clambered into his lap uninvited as he sat by the fire, clutching a book, "Read to me, Papa." His hand froze on the page, his eyes flicking to me as if seeking escape. But then she nestled against his chest, and something in him broke. His voice, deep and halting at first, filled the chamber as he read aloud. Alara drifted to sleep before the story ended, her head resting against his heart. The castle began to change. Servants whispered less, for there was little left to gossip about. They saw the Duke in the gardens, walking hand in hand with his children, or seated at the table with them instead of alone. Rumors of curses began to fade, replaced by murmurs of admiration. "The Duke has found his strength again," they said. And yet, the greatest change was not in how the world saw him, but in how the children did. Adrian no longer asked if his father dreamed of him. He began to boast, showing the other boys how his papa had taught him to hold a sword. Alara, once shy in her longing, now carried his cloak pin wherever she went, as though it were a shield. But most of all, the Duke himself changed. I caught him one night in the nursery, long after the twins had fallen asleep. He stood at the foot of their beds, the firelight soft against his face. For a moment, he simply watched them, his chest rising and falling with something between grief and joy. Then, in a whisper I almost did not catch, he said, "Forgive me. I am late, but I am here now." It was not spoken to me. It was not even spoken to the twins. It was spoken to the ghost of the woman he had lost, and perhaps to himself. And I knew, with tears burning in my eyes, that at last, he was learning to let love return. The final test came not with whispers of nobles, nor the weight of grief, but in the simplest of forms, a storm. The storm rolled in with a violence that seemed almost biblical. Rain lashed against the stone walls of Ravenshade, thunder cracked across the sky, and wind howled through the battlements like wolves calling in the night. The servants scurried about, securing shutters and reinforcing doors, while the great fires in the hall sputtered and spat against the drafts. Storms were not unusual in spring, but this one had a fury that unsettled even the most hardened knights. In the nursery, the twins huddled together, their small figures dwarfed by the canopy bed. Adrian sat stiffly, trying to be brave, though his trembling fingers clutched Alara's hand. Alara buried her face against his shoulder, her sobs quiet but unrelenting each time thunder split the heavens. I knelt beside them, smoothing their hair, whispering comfort, but I knew my words were not enough. What they longed for was not the soothing of a nursemaid. They longed for the safety only a father could give. Then the door creaked open. The Duke stood there, framed by the flicker of torchlight from the corridor. His cloak was damp with rain, his hair disheveled, his face carved with lines of weariness and conflict. He had not been expected. More than once, storms had driven him deeper into his study, away from the sound of frightened children. Yet tonight, he had come. His eyes swept the room, settling on the sight of his heirs cowering in fear, and for the first time in 4 long years, I saw not the cold gaze of a lord, but the haunted expression of a man stripped bare. He hesitated, one step into the room, as though the distance between the doorway and the bed was a battlefield he could not cross. Adrian stiffened, his little chin lifting in defiance even as his body shook. Alara clung tighter to him, whispering, "Papa won't come. He never comes." And then he moved. Slowly at first, as though afraid his children would recoil. But then with determination, he crossed the room and lowered himself onto the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped beneath his weight, and both children stared at him wide-eyed, their fear momentarily forgotten in their shock. For a long moment, he said nothing. His hand rested on the coverlet, close enough that the children could feel the warmth of his presence, but not close enough to frighten them. Then, in a voice rough and unfamiliar from disuse, he said, "The storm is only noise. It cannot touch you here." Alara's lip trembled. but it feels like it will break the sky. The Duke's hand trembled once before he opened his arms. Then let it break. You are safe. Elara moved first, her small body launching forward with the desperation of a child starved of affection. She buried herself against his chest, her sobs muffled by the thick fabric of his cloak. Adrian sat frozen, torn between pride and longing. His father turned then, one arm holding his daughter, while the other reached out toward his son. "Come," he whispered, voice cracking. "I cannot protect you if you stand apart." Adrian's eyes brimmed with tears he refused to let fall. For a heartbeat, I thought he would refuse. But then, with a trembling breath, he crawled across the bed and pressed himself against his father's side. The Duke wrapped his arm around him, drawing both children close, and at last the dam broke. The boy's tears spilled freely, his shoulders shaking as he clung to the man he had longed for but never known. The Duke held them as though he had been drowning for years and had finally found air. His broad shoulders bowed, his head bent over their small forms, and his voice trembled against their hair. "I thought I lost everything the night you were born," he confessed, the words raw with pain. "I thought you took her from me, and so I turned away because I could not look at you without seeing her last breath." His grip tightened, fierce and desperate. "But I see now. I was wrong. I was given everything worth living for. You are not my curse. You are my light." Thunder cracked again, shaking the window panes, but within that embrace, the storm lost its power. The twins clung to him, not with fear, but with relief, as though they had finally found the home they had searched for in every corner of the castle. Alara's small voice broke the silence. "Do you really mean it, Papa? That we are your light?" He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Yes, little star. You are the reason I rise each morning." Adrian lifted his tear-streaked face. "Even when you did not speak to us?" The Duke's eyes closed, his pain laid bare. "Especially then. My silence was my weakness, not yours. Can you forgive me?" Adrian studied him with the seriousness of a boy far older than 4 years. Then, slowly, he nodded, his small hand gripping his father's cloak as though anchoring himself to the truth. Elara, less restrained, whispered fiercely, "I already forgave you, Papa." I stood in the corner, tears burning my eyes, knowing I was witnessing the moment that would change everything. No decree, no counsel, no whispered rumor could undo what was happening now. A bond had been forged in the heart of a storm, and no blade or lie could sever it. The hours passed, and still he held them. When the storm raged at its fiercest, he did not flinch. When they finally drifted to sleep, nestled in his arms, he did not move. For once, the Duke of Ravenshade was not a lord, not a commander, not a grieving widower. He was simply a father, claiming the children who had been his all along. The thunder roared, but in that small circle of arms and hearts, the storm could not reach. I stood in the corner, my own tears falling freely. I had carried them through 4 years of silence, shielded them from lies and whispers, prayed that one day their father would see them as they truly were. And now, at last, he did. From that night on, the shadow of grief no longer ruled Ravenshade. The Duke did not become a different man overnight. Grief does not vanish so easily. But he became a father. He taught Adrian to ride his first pony, held Alara's hand at her first recital, and walked with them through the halls not as strangers, but as a family. And as for me, I found peace. My task was never to replace a mother, nor to heal the Duke's heart, but to bridge the distance until he could walk it himself. Now, as I watch them laugh together in the gardens, I know my duty is fulfilled. They call this castle Ravenshade, a place once shrouded in darkness, but to me, it has become something else. A place where love, though wounded, found its way back into the light.